Welcome to this episode of Let's Be Civil. Today on Let's Be Civil, I'm joined by Bob Scheller. Bob Scheller has over 30 years experience as a geotechnical engineer. He is a registered professional engineer in Virginia, Maryland, the District of Columbia, Texas, and North Carolina. Most of his work involves the supervision of construction inspectors. He is a longtime member of ASCE and ASTM, having served as chair of ASTM's subcommittee on evaluation of laboratories. All right, welcome everybody to another edition of Let's Be Civil, Civil Engineering podcast. And before we get started, I'm excited to say that we now have a domain. It's let's be civil.engineering. I didn't know engineering was a domain extension, but it is. And so you'll be able to start sending emails to me if you wish. It's going to be at john@letsbecivil.engineering. Get that, civil.engineering. It just worked out real nicely for me in that respect. And you'll see more of that on the YouTube channel here in the next couple of days. So, but Bob is with us today, and I commented to him offline that he's looking awfully tan for someone who's supposed to be working. Yeah, I mean, look at, I'm in Texas, and yeah.
I don't tan. It's actually just, it's just probably sunburn, more sunburn.
Okay, more sun, okay. Or he knew he was going to be on today and asked for a little, high definition, pat down, little makeup to, but Bob is now a resident of North Carolina. I used to be a resident of North Carolina. And so he was talking about hanging out on the beach. So that's something to aspire to as an engineer, is to have a good career that provides for you along the way. And then you're able to sort of move towards retirement on the Outer Banks, right? So why don't you talk a little, let's sort of start at the back end maybe. And how do you get to where you are now?
I currently live in South Nags Head, North Carolina, which is on the southern end of the quote-unquote Nags Head area. If you're familiar with Kitty Hawk and Kill Devil Hills, officially, like, the Wright Memorial is in Kill Devil Hills, where some would say aviation was started. People in Ohio would disagree with that statement. But, North Carolina, says they're first in flight. Yeah. And then from here, if you keep going south, you get into the Cape Hatteras National Seashore. And then you get down to islands called Ocracoke, and then you go further down. It's barrier islands along the Atlantic coast of North Carolina. We get a lot of hurricanes here. It's very... we've been here for 3 years off and on, and we've dealt with hurricanes in the past. So far, we really haven't had any damage to our house, which is a good thing. We'd like to say, if a hurricane hits, but around here, you actually say when the hurricane hits, not if. Everything here, you're off the first floor. All living space has to be off the first floor. So we're excited to be living here. We love walking to the beach. As a geotechnical engineer, it's a little different. I'm used to silt, clay, sand, and gravel. Well, there's no gravel here at all. And here it's just a lot of sand, and you might have some clay. And so it's, believe it or not, after being in the business for over 30 years, I'm learning stuff new here, because I'm not used to a pure sand environment.
Sure.
It's pretty interesting, but I love to fish. I can sit on the beach with a fishing pole in my hand with my feet in the water, and the rest of the world doesn't exist. You're just looking out over the ocean, and it's very calming.
Yeah.
It really helps. But here in North Carolina, we have my wife is very involved in sea turtles. That's a big thing because they're an endangered species. A sea turtle, what they do is they'll actually come back and lay eggs at the exact same spot every single year. Obviously within a little space, but and one sea turtle will lay 100 to 120 eggs at a time. Out of those 120 eggs, maybe 2 will make it. In terms of, because what they do is once the eggs hatch, they all crawl into the ocean. Well, the moment they hit the water, it's the buffet time for all the fish. And so down here, in the organization that does the turtles, it's called Nest. They call it potato chips because when those hit the water, the fish go crazy. And truthfully, a lot of them just get eaten by predators. I mean, it's a circle of life. It sounds bad, but that's the way it is.
Right.
But it's interesting. I mean, we do different things here, and so far we really enjoy living here. Working here is a little interesting. Some of the people's attitudes, but other than that, it's supposedly many years ago I was conceived here, and then we didn't come to the Outer Banks for many years. And then when I hit 18, when I went to college, my parents started coming here again, and I've been here probably almost every single year, at least for a week, for the past, I'd say 35 years.
Wow.
It's from where I was actually born in the District of Columbia. So I'm one of those few people that can say I was born in the United States, but I wasn't born in the state.
Right.
So I'm a native Washingtonian, lived in Northern Virginia for most of my life, lived in some other countries because my father was Department of State, but went to Virginia Tech, a great engineering school, graduated civil engineering. I always wanted to be a civil engineer because I could actually see my work. You drive down the road and you're like, hey, I helped build that. I worked on that.
Did you always want to be a geotech, or was that something that evolved while you were in school?
That probably evolved.
Or after?
The funniest thing about it is, out of all my undergrad classes, geotech is probably the one I hated the most. I think that had more to do with the professor than the content.
Okay.
But
let's assume they're no longer going to be around to watch this.
Well, yeah, I'm sure, but I still remember his name though. But
okay.
When I was a senior, I started interviewing with different firms. I thought more of a civil engineering background in terms of drawing site plans, things of that nature, stormwater. I was thinking that, or transportation. I had an interview with a national geotechnical testing construction inspection firm. The interview actually went very well, and the person interviewing me was, on campus interviews, lots of times they last half hour. You come in and out, and after a half hour, he's like, hey, I don't have another interview. He goes, do you mind sitting and talking for another? And so we sat and talked another half hour. And truthfully, he really sold me on geotech. And so technically, I play with dirt for a living. I can honestly say that's my job, to play with dirt. And obviously, I play with concrete and masonry and things of that nature. And over the years, I probably did more with construction inspection than geotech. But believe it or not, I was turning hand augers yesterday on a job site, looking for, bad soil, buried clay possibly, and how high groundwater is. Around here, groundwater is anywhere from 6 inches to 4 feet down. And so, we have to, even for single family houses, they require, you get some geotech work done to see where the groundwater is, things of that nature.
Yeah.
But again, I think one of the biggest things with civil engineering is you get to see your work. If you're a mechanical engineer and you're working on some sprocket, you have no idea where that is. I really enjoy, for the longest time, we did a lot of school system work up in Northern Virginia. And for probably 15 years, I was their only geotech engineer they used. And I've probably built brand new, probably 30, 35 schools at least. actually more than that. And it's very refreshing to, again, to go by and say, hey, I helped build that.
Yeah.
It's rewarding.
Yeah. So one of the things I say to the students is being a civil engineer kind of ruins your life, because for the reason that you're, I mean, on the plus side, you get to see what you do, and you get to see what other people do, and you get to point your finger at what other people do.
Yep.
But it means that, you don't go anywhere without seeing civil engineering. It's visible all day, every day, no matter what you do in your day. And so I tell our, students at all the universities I've been at is that, it's a little bit of a curse, because once you start to learn stuff, it's hard. So just like you said, you're walking on the beach, you're wanting, I mean, I don't think your wife is walking on the beach going, look at the gradation of the sand. And I'll bet you are looking at the gradation of the sand. Yeah.
She's like, what's that black? I was like, that's silt. Okay. It's coming. And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, don't worry about it. Just explain it. But, one of the things you also find out with civil engineering is, one, it's not a coat and tie job. I mean, truthfully, for the majority of my career, I wear jeans majority of my life, because lots of times I'm going out in the field and I'm getting dirty. All the firms I've been with, even the managers went out in the field, jumped at a footing, or looked at problem soils, been on a concrete pour. Wearing coat and tie is not conducive to that.
Right.
And so, that's the one thing about civil engineers also, is you get your hands dirty. You're in amongst the workers, shall I say. Construction, when a building's being constructed, obviously soil boring is to start with for geotech report, what type of foundation, how big, how deep, things of that nature. And then you followed up with a construction inspection, and you see how things are built not correctly many times. You learn what trades are good and what trades are lazy, things of that nature. But it's really good to make sure things are built right. I mean, that's the other thing I really enjoy, that, you're trying to make sure that this building is, buildings are designed with factors of safety. Structural engineers use 1.5 or even higher sometimes. For bearing capacity, geotechs, lots of times you use factor of safety 3. That's overblown, but, when you see how some, shall we say, contractors build things, it's a good thing theirs built with a factor of safety.
Well, and for the people watching, I mean, when we say factor of safety, what we're saying is essentially we're going to construct that to be 3 times stronger than it needs to be. In simple terms, it's we figure out the minimum that it needs, and then we say, okay, we're going to make it 2-3 times stronger than that, because we can't let anything fail. I mean, stuff fails, but our job is to try our best so that nothing fails, because we can't allow people to be injured or to die from anything, any of the work that we do. So I mean, being able to see what you do is one of the real rewarding things of the career. But where you are today, so financially, there's a financial reward here as well, right? Because the seriousness of the work that a civil engineer does gets rewarded financially.
I mean, civil engineers are not the highest paid engineers, obviously, probably chemies and double E's maybe. But as a civil engineer, you're able to live comfortably. I mean, as long as you don't obviously go crazy and spend money, and truthfully, most civil engineers are not that way. Most civil engineers, they bury their money in the backyard, shall we say. But it allows you to live a comfortable life.
Right. So how many kids do you have?
I have 2 kids. My wife had a child from a previous marriage, and then I showed up and she was in 2nd grade, And then so basically I've raised her, and then we have a son who's now 25. He decided to go finance instead of engineering.
Okay.
And so he has a pretty nice job up in the DC area.
But
so.
you'd mentioned that you were no longer in the paying tuition business.
Yes. I was lucky enough that my parents had the means to pay for my tuition and board. Now, extracurricular activities in college, shall we say, I had to pay for those, but I was lucky enough that I graduated that I didn't have any student loans. And so my wife and I, for both of our kids, we did the exact same thing. We paid their room and board and tuition, and then if they wanted beer money or pizza money, they had to pay that themselves. But we wanted our kids not to be burdened with student loans.
Right.
I totally realize a lot of people can't do that. I
Right.
totally understand it.
Right.
But as a civil engineer, we were able to do that.
Right. And that's where I was hoping you were going to go, is that this is some of the reward for the hard work, as you're able to have that not only comfortable living for yourself, but also for your family and your children.
Correct. I mean, and you're able to provide for your kids. Don't saddle them with student loans. You're able to, if you want to take a vacation, obviously when you first start, you're not going to be able to, but after
Sure.
so many years, if you want to go to Paris, France, you can go to Paris, France. That you make enough money to live comfortably. I'm not saying LeBron James comfortably, obviously,
Yes.
but civil engineers do well enough that they prosper. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Now, you and I know each other through organizational work, and that means travel. And so another component here is you've been able to travel because we have conferences. Our meetings are all around the U.S. and sometimes outside the U.S. Have you taken your wife with you, on some of these? I mean, that's one way my wife and I would travel, would be to go to these meetings and then, arrive a few days early, stay a few days late.
I would say once my son hit his freshman year at Virginia Tech, my wife would go to me to all the meetings. Lots of times we wouldn't show up that early, but we had a group of people who were from the Washington area that we always met up with. And so most people's wives would come. And so I'd be in meetings and she'd be going around seeing this museum or something like that.
Right.
There'd be a day or two that I didn't have morning meetings. And so her and I would, go here or there. I'm a sports fan. And so one of the great things was going to all these areas, and we would, if the baseball team was playing in town,
Sure.
we'd go see the Toronto Blue Jays at Sky Dome, or
Right.
we'd go see the Rockies at Coors Field. We do stuff like that.
Right.
And it was really fun to see different parts of the world. Although ASTM is primarily the country,
Yeah.
I was able to go to San Diego twice, which truthfully, personally, I think San Diego is probably the most beautiful city in the United States. But it's just, you see different things. And then like this past year for Houston, one of my best friends actually lives in Houston. So we did actually fly early and stayed with him for a couple nights in downtown Houston.
Yeah.
But that's the other thing about civil engineer. Well, I guess many occupations is there's a lot of associations, and you should, I encourage you to get involved in those organizations. For civil engineering, for ASTM, especially for me in the testing field, ASTM writes the specifications that my inspectors would use every day. And so, to tell them I'm the one that's actually writing that.
Right.
Now, sometimes I have to explain to them that, no, I didn't write that particular part. But other than that, though, it's when you go to client meetings or even meetings with, say, a jurisdiction, and you're sitting at that meeting and say, I know exactly what I'm doing. I helped write the specs.
Right.
Is here, and they look at you like, wow, this person really knows what he's what he's doing.
Right.
So it's been that part of it's been rewarding also.
Well, this kind of ties in with the comments about driving around and seeing your work. these documents that are then used for, in construction. And it's like you said, you contribute to the content of the document. Some parts of it aren't well written. Some parts are in reverse order. They tell you the last thing to do first and the first thing to do last. So we struggle with some of that. But I was going to say it's also rewarding to be able to know that people around the world, not just local, not just in your firm, not just in the US, but literally around the world, are using these documents that you've contributed to.
Yep.
And I mean, it's not that you're ever going to know, you don't know the projects or any of those sorts of things, but you do know in the back of your mind that people are using these and you've helped that happen. I mean, so there are structures around the world that are constructed with an indirect assist from you, from Bob and from John and from other people.
Yeah, and when my inspectors run tests, whether they're in North Carolina, Northern Virginia, they're in California, wherever, they're supposed to run that test the exact same way.
Right.
And so most of the people, especially when I interview them, I'd be explaining this, that, everything we do is based on national standards. And most of them would get, big-eyed. And so I say, hey, you run a slump test in California, you're supposed to run it the exact same way here in North Carolina, exact same way. And so it's, it's interesting. And like you said, it's actually not just the United States, it's throughout the world.
Right.
Side story, this is actually quite a few years ago, but I was involved in an expert case in one of the Caribbean islands, and they were having some issues with concrete. And so, I take a trip to the batch plant, and I mean, the aggregate, the coarse aggregate, the fine aggregate bins, I mean, you semi had to struggle of were they separate or not. When you ask somebody, are their scales calibrated? And the guy's looking at you like, yeah, 10 years ago we had it calibrated. It's funny. You really realize how some of these countries, they don't exactly follow the specs the way they're supposed to.
Yeah.
And then you look at them and say, and you wonder why you're having problems.
Right.
And,
right.
It's actually pretty interesting. So
yeah. Well, like you said, I mean, we're all supposed to be doing it the same way. It doesn't matter. For some, they're not. In a case like that, they're actually not in a position to follow it exactly. I mean, their resources don't allow them to. I'm sure another thing that you've heard, and that probably would be good for people to be aware of, is the individual who's been doing this for 30 years. And it really doesn't matter what you tell them because they have been doing it for 30 years. They obviously know what they're doing. How often do you run into that kind of an individual who sort of headbutts with you?
There's different types of individuals. You can start with earthwork. The person who's on either the loader, the dozer, or whatever, he's been doing it for 50 years. Sometimes they'll say 100 years, but he'll say, and he's like, we don't need to do that. You don't know what you're talking about. And you're like, look, this is why roads break down all the time, because this is what happens, just cut off the tree at 2 foot and just fill right over it in place. No, we're going to remove the whole stump. Okay. We're going to remove everything here. To the concrete guy who says, well, I just want to add water to it because it's a lot easier to work with. And you're like, no, it's going to crack. The strength goes down. And they're like, yeah, but 40 years ago when we were building this, we didn't have this problem. And then, of course, you got the masons who, why do we need this rebar in these cells? Before we never put rebar in areas. And what's this grout stuff? I don't need to put grout in these areas, and then when your back is turned, he'll stuff a paper bag down that cell so the grout won't go in there. So he saves money on grout. It's interesting, now obviously I have quite a bit of gray hair, but for the longest time, before I had gray hair, people would look at you and say, you don't know what you're talking about. I've been doing this for 50 years.
Right.
And you're like, actually, I actually do know what I'm talking about here.
Right.
And now, you'll give recommendations on how to fix something, and they'll say, I don't think you're right. And about 2 days later, they're like, you actually knew what you were talking about. It actually is working pretty good. So,
Yeah. Yeah, you have to have those successes.
Yep.
Yeah. So tell me, you're nearing retirement. You said you're kind of working, part-time.
Right.
So you're still actively working, but not on a full-time schedule. What are the coming years looking like for you? I mean, what's retirement going to look like for you? What are you planning to do, day to day?
I would say quite a bit more fishing, probably. There's a pier a mile up the street here, and I can probably go sit at a pier for at least 6 months out of the year. Other than that, there's an aquarium here. My wife and I have been there, multiple times. We love going to aquariums and zoos, but both of us will probably volunteer at the aquarium, to do stuff with the animals.
Sure.
Probably, help some of the disadvantaged people in the area, shall I say.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks of, a beach community like, oh, everybody's got to be rich. Well, there's not. There's a large amount of people who are living not great.
Right.
And, those are all the hourly workers. Like, for instance, here, most of the hourly workers do not have benefits. So they don't have any health insurance. So these people only go to the doctor if they're deathly ill.
Right.
Well, they go to the hospital and they can't even pay the bills. And so the hospitals here and the doctor's office ends up writing off a lot of the bills.
Mm.
But we'd really like to, help, quote unquote, help with the animals and probably help people. I mean, that's what we'll be doing. So
does this come at all from things that you've seen and done during your career? Has that influenced those decisions, or were those just separate interests that were there, for a long time?
I think part of it was, my parents bringing me up. We were always a very close family. I was 3 months old. We went to London for 3 years, and then for second, third, and fourth grade, I was in Paris. And so my family was kind of forced to live together. And we always just, one of the things we always did was we always had a family dinner every night, no matter what. And that was really big for us. It was just, and so once I had my own family, I did the same thing.
Sure.
Every day you look at your son, say, what happened in school today?
Right.
And every day it's nothing.
Right.
And then you're like, and then after a while they get the ideas. They can't just say that, so they have to say something. But I think my upbringing and my wife being a nurse, I think that's another thing. She being a registered nurse, she's very big on helping people. And so I think the combination of those things, also in this country, we definitely have obviously disadvantaged people, definitely. But when I was in college, my parents were from Mexico City, and I never really saw poverty until I went to Mexico City. And I was like, wow, there's no middle class. You either have money or you have absolutely no money. And that really opened my eyes. And then you hear stories about a lot of other countries, and you're like, I have a lot here. I need to share it, and I need to help people.
Mm-hmm.
I was put on this earth for some reason. So
right.
I think it's to help people. So I probably haven't done enough of that in my life so far. And I think, but I probably a lot of people say that, you're working 50 hours a week. That's the way life goes. You're working 50 hours a week and you're raising kids, and there's not much time for a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You do the best you can, but
right.
But
now you're in a position to do some of those things.
Correct. When the kids are out of the house, you're not paying tuition anymore. Once you're of a certain age, mortgages are paid off, and so you don't have those real big bills anymore.
Right.
And so then it's like, okay, well, instead of a mortgage, we're going to go to Italy for a trip, or we're going to go help in the soup kitchen, or we're going to do things like that.
Mm-hmm. 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 So we just got maybe about a minute and a half left here. So everything that you have talked about here with me, none of it to me says nerd. Isn't engineering, people just look at engineering and go, people that are engineers are nerdy people. And, book smart and, give me a calculator and stuff like that. But, all that we've talked about today, there's nothing there that says that to me. Would you agree? Do you see yourself as nerdy at all?
Well, it's a good thing my wife's not here, but generally,
don't let her see the replay, right?
when I was in school, we thought the electrical engineers were all the real book smart people, and the civil engineers, they were, CE stood for casual engineering to a certain point, and that the civil engineers were the ones who they combined book smart with common sense smart. And a lot of electrical engineers or chemies, shall we say, they have all the book smart. A lot of them don't have the common sense smart. And that's the one thing about civil engineers is you have to have common sense about so much that happens. An architect draws a curved line on a plan. That's very hard to build lots of times. And you have to bring common sense into your engineering. And I mean, I think that's, so are we nerds? Yes, we're book smart, but we're also very, where nerds are not going to be playing with dirt or playing with concrete or getting dirty. They're basically, they're just going to want to stay in an office, and we don't do that. Civil engineers sitting in a cubicle all day. They just don't do that.
Well, and on top of it, just an awareness, a societal awareness, a concern about the environment, separate from being environmental engineering kind of if someone were to talk to you, have this conversation with you without any reference to the profession, I don't know that someone would say, oh, that person's a civil engineer. I mean, we are like everybody else, but I like what you're saying is, I think, very true. Civil engineering is very much a combination of the understanding of the principles, but also how do you actually implement them in a realistic way. You just, not just following an equation for the sake of equation. So we got to get going. Outstanding conversation, as I tell everybody that I talk to. I love the conversations. I'd like to be in North Carolina. We were there when I was a graduate student. We lived in Raleigh. Went out to the Outer Banks a few times. Actually, for people who are older, would know Charles Kuralt, who used to be on CBS. Very distinguished individual, North Carolina roots. Met him on a couple of occasions. When we get offline, I'll show you something. If I can find it real quick. I got something I'd show you. But thank you so much for being a guest here on our Let's Be Civil podcast. And I look forward to seeing you at our next ASTM meeting.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Okay. So hang on one second.